So let us discuss static variables and static function. In Java, we have a static keyword. In this session, we will be learning about the static function, that is static method and static field. That those are the static variables. How these members are different from those variables and functions which are not static. Before coming to examples and before coming to definition, I'll show you this diagram to explain. Now, suppose we have a class and that class represents a student. So every student will have their own ID and every student will have their own name. But if the course is BTech and the course fees is 50,000, it is common for all the students of that batch. So instead of storing those common values inside every object that will consume more memory, and it will be also repeated at many places. So what we do, we create static variables so that these values are stored only once in the memory, and that can be shared between all objects of the class. So I'll repeat once again. Java has a static keyword, and the static keyword can be used with variables as well as functions. So why do we need to declare a variable static or a function static? That is what we have to discuss here in this session. So before moving on to the definition and example, I'll repeat once again. There are many situations wherein all objects that we create from a class has something in common. So those common variables are not stored in the object, but they are stored separately and that can be shared between all objects of the class. For example, a student class can have the ID and the name that will be different for each object of the student class. But the course name, that is BTech, will be common to all the objects of that class, and the course fee that will be same for all the students, all the objects. So such variables and such information which are common between all objects are declared with the keyword static inside the class. And what will happen once we declare it static, it will not be formed inside the class, but it will be formed yeah, separately in the memory, and it can be accessed from anywhere. Now, coming to the definition, a variable or function declared with the keyword static is called a static variable or a static function. These static members are not formed inside the object of the class. They are formed independently in memory. They can be used with object or the class name. They are common to all objects of the class. We'll see each of these in action in the examples. A static function can use only static variable. That is important thing to be remembered. A non-static function, normal functions that we declare, can use static as well as non-static variables. A static function can be called with the class name. A static function can be called with the class name and dot operator or with the object also. So now let us come to some examples and then we'll come back to these definitions again. Now, see in this program, this is a program to calculate area of a circle. I'll remove this part to make it simple. In this program, the area of the circle is calculated and the radius is taken from the user. Now, this main function has the keyword public, has the keyword static, has the keyword void. So we have to first understand this. Public function can be accessed from outside the class, from inside the class, from outside the class. These are access specifiers, which we have already discussed in previous session. The static function can be accessed without creating object. Now, to call this main function we do not create any object. Suppose we have a function here, void f1, any function. Now to call this function, we have to create the object of the class. We cannot call the function directly, but if we declare it as a static, then we can call it directly. That is the difference. How it happens, that we'll see in the coming examples also. So in the normal programs that we write, we have a main function that is a static. So a static function is used without creating object, can be used without creating object. And then we have a void, that means this function is not returning any value. That also we'll see. Uh, Coming to the next example, example number 2. Here you can see we have a main function and we have an area circle function. Now in this main function, uh, we in this example 2 class, we have a area circle. This area circle will calculate the area of the circle. The radius of the circle will be passed as parameter. And to call this area circle, what we have to do, we have to create the object of this class. ex2 obj is equals to new ex2. That can be written in one line also like this. Many times we write it this way also. And it can be written in 2 steps also, like here we have the obj is equals to new. So, excuse me. It is same as this. This is just creating object. Then we have a variable radius. Suppose the value of radius is 50. Since it is of float type, we'll have to write F. I'll not take it from the user, so I'll remove this. Now, this area circle, when we want to call this area circle, we have to first create object of this example 2 class. We cannot call this area circle directly. We cannot write area circle like this. Why? Because this is a normal function. This is not a static function. So a normal function, whenever we create normal function, to call that function, we have to create the object, and then with the help of dot operator, we call the function. Now, suppose we have the same program written once again. Let us see here in example 3. Now, the same program here we have declared it as a static. So once we declare the function as a static, what happens? When we declare a function as a static, then to call this function, we do not need to create the object of the class. You can see here, suppose we have this. In this example 3 class, we have an area circle function, and this area circle function we have declared as a static. So when we declare the area circle function as a static, we can call the function directly. We do not have to create the object of the class. See here, we have not created object of the class. We have a class ex3. We have this function area circle. We are calling the area circle function without creating object of the class. And suppose we do not make it static, then what will happen? Now we cannot call this area circle like this. What we'll have to do, we'll have to create an object, example 3. Obj is equals to new example 3. We are creating the object, and then with the help of this object, we'll have to call the area circle function. So this is the difference between a static function and a non-static function. Here you can see when we declare the function as a static, we do not need to create the object of the class. Now you can understand why we create main function as a static, because to call the main function, we never create the object of the class. So whenever we want to call a function without creating object of the class, then that function has to be declared as a static function. So there's a concept of a static function, and a static function can be called without creating object of the class. Now we have to understand the static. Once again, we have one more example. Now, suppose we have a class and a static function, but this class is different. You can see here we have this is a one class, and then we have class example, and from main we want to call this function. Since this is a static function, we do not have to create object of C6 class, but if the class is different, if the call we are calling from a different class, we are calling from example 8, and the F1 function is in C6 class, then we cannot write it this way. If the F1 function is in the example 8 class, then we'll call it this way. And if the F1 function is in another class, then we'll have to mention the class name and then the dot operator. Suppose we have I'm giving you one more example, the static void F2. We have a F2 function here. And now this, to call this F2 function, we first of all, since it is static, we do not have to create the object. So what we can do, we can write F2. Why? Because it is in the same class. We can call it this way also. Example class name dot function name. This is also. And then to call the F1 function, we cannot write F1 like this because it isn't different. So when the function is in a different class, the class name dot function name will be used. When the function is in the same class, then we can call it with the class name or without the class name. In all these cases, we are not creating the object of the class. Why? Because the function F1 and the function F2 are static function. And to call the static function, we do not need to create the object of the class. Even if we have the object, we can call the function. Now, suppose we do not need to create the object, but if the object is available, suppose we have C6 obj is equals to new C6, then also with the help of this object also we can call the F1 function. We do not need to create the object, but if we want to use the object, then also it is possible. This is also perfectly okay, and we can call this function also. So what is a static function? Any function which we declare as static with the keyword static becomes the static function. Like here we have this static function. Now, what is the difference? When we want to call this function, we can call it directly if it is being called from the same class. We can call it with the class name dot function name when if it is in another class, and we can call it with object dot function name normally as we do without static methods. So that is also perfectly okay. So this is about a static function. Now, what is a static variable? So we'll come to another example where I have written the program to explain the static variable. Now, this is a student class. Okay. So if you see this student class, we have few variables. The name of the student, the ID of the student, and the fee that the student has paid. So these are the variables. Then there are two variables, course fee and course name. These are declared to be as a static. Course fee is a static and course name is a static. Now, what will happen when we declare the variable as static? When we declare the variable as static, these variables which are static will be formed commonly, and it will not be formed inside the object. Now, when we create the object of the student class, suppose we have two objects, object 1 and object 2. So there can be 100 students. So all the 100 students will have the same course name, BTech. All the 100 students will have to pay the same course fee, that is suppose 50,000. So instead of writing or creating it separately for each object, we can make it common. So those common information about objects are declared as static. I'll come back to the diagram where I would like to show. See, when we create the object of the student class, each object have each object representing a student will have their own name, will have their own ID. Like first object, the name can be John, the ID can be 22. Second object, the name can be Mike, the ID can be 23. But the course name and course fee is same for all the objects. So when we declare it as static, it is not formed inside the object. Instead, it is formed commonly in memory, and from there it can be accessed, used in all the objects. How it will be done? We'll come to the example to understand it. Now see, coming back to this class, here we have the string name. This is normal variable. So this will be and ID and fee paid. This will be for all objects. So these are also called the object variables. And then we have the course fee and the course name. These are static. So these will be formed commonly. Now we have a set course function. This set course function is declared to be static, and this will set the course fee and the course name. The static function can access only static variables. So it is accessing only static variable. Then we have set info function that will set the value for ID and name, and it will set the ID, the name, and the fee paid, which are non-static, and then we have a show info function. Now coming back to the main, now see what is happening. We are calling the set course. Set course is, you can see here, set course is a static function. So this set course is being called with the class name. This set course is being called with the class name. We are not calling it with the object. So we are setting the fee, the course fee to be 50,000 and the course name to be BTech. This has been set. Now we create first object S1. In this first object, what we are setting, the ID, the name, and the fee that this student has paid at the time of admission. So set info will pass 22 here, the John value here, and the fee paid here. So name will be John, ID will be 22, and fee paid will be 5,000. Similarly, we are again creating another object S2, and this S2 object we are calling set info. The ID will be 23, the name will be Mike, and the fee paid will be 15,000. Now, when we call the S1 dot show info, so S1 dot show info function will call the this function, and this will display ID is equals to 22, name is equals to John. Now the fee remaining that is to be paid is course fees is 50,000 and fee paid is 5,000. So it will print 45,000. From where we are getting course fee? We are getting course fee from here. You can see 50,000. So this 50,000 that we have set through the static is common to all. So it can be used here. So that, in this way, again, when we call the S2 function, S2 object or show function, show info, what will happen? This S2 object will also call the show, and it will display ID as 23, name as Mike, and the fee remaining will be 35,000 since course fees is 50,000, and the fee that is paid by the student Mike is 15,000. So the difference will be printed. So here you can see all the definitions of the static. What are the definitions of the static? I'm coming here. A variable or function declared with keyword static is called a static variable or static function. These static members are not formed inside the object of the class. They are formed independently in memory. Here, course name and course fees are formed independently and they will be shared between all objects. They can be called with the object or the class name. So I have discussed that a static variable, a static function can be called with the object also and with the class name also. A static function can only use static variable. This is important that when we declare the function as a static, it can use only static variables. But a non-static function can use static as well as non-static variables. Many times questions are asked in interviews, what is the difference between a static method and non-static? So we have the important difference is that a static method use only static variables and a non-static method can use a static as well as non-static variable. And static method can be called with the class name, but non-static method cannot be called with the class name. Object is required. A static function can be called with the class name and the dot operator as we do normally also. So now coming back to this example once again, see, why do we declare variables as a static or functions as a static? In situations, in classes, when we create a class, there are many informations which are common between all objects. Those common values need to be stored only once in the memory. It is not to be stored with all the objects. So such variables are declared as a static. Now to initialize those variables, what we do, we create a static method, and that static method will set the value. Here we have a set course, which is a static, and this will set the course fee and course name. And call this set course, you can see we do not need the object. Instead, what we are doing, we are using the class name student.set course. So it will set the course. Now, when we create the object, these object will set the values for non-static variables like name, ID, and fee. And when we have a processing function like show info, we have to show what is the fees remaining. So for the fees remaining, we need two values. What is the total fee to be paid, which is a static course fee variable, and fee paid, what is the fee that has been paid by each object, which will be different. So in this way, and these are the situations where we declare variables and functions as static.